A few decades ago, in the chapel I then attended, the Methodist Church, in its wisdom, decided to impose on the congregation a merger of two services, one made up of charismatic evangelicals who had a worship band with drums and electric guitars and practiced the gifts of the Holy Spirit and shared the ministry of the Word. The other made up of elderly traditionalists who preferred a hymn sandwich worship structure with the organ accompanying hymns and an accredited local preacher or minister at the helm. In the uncomfortable, ill-assorted merger, we had a traditional church choir in which all the members were old ladies and a worship band made up of young adults and teenagers. The choir sat on a dais in the sanctuary, and the worship band was allowed 3 choruses per service, which they led from the floor spot between the choir and the congregation. The choir mistress had a problem with her vocal cords and had to stop singing, but she continued to lead and rehearse the choir, which was not an especially gracious body of people. I remember one of the ladies in it pausing as she passed my bearded husband on her way through the chapel to remark to him, "Why don't you shave that weed off your face?" That kind of people they were. Sunday by Sunday, the organist, whose legs were too short for her feet to reach the pedals, but she did her best, accompanied all the hymns, which the choir had practiced and sang lustily, apart from the choir mistress who couldn't sing but held up her book and stood with them, all turning to face the congregation. And then at the designated moment, the worship band traipsed forward for their 3 permitted choruses. While they did their best to lead these in worshipful manner, behind them, elevated into full view by virtue of being on that raised section of flooring, sat the choir, looking like stone statues, their mouths shut like traps, their eyes as unresponsive as the eyes of a dead cod, staring straight ahead, not standing, certainly not singing, not even looking up the song in their books. They hated the leader of the worship band, and they didn't mind saying so. Week by week we lived through this, Sunday by Sunday, trying to accept love's requirement of humility, trying to let go gracefully of the vibrant and living experience of worship the church had required us to lay down. No more prophecies, no more healings, no more words of knowledge, no more praying in tongues, no chorus to be sung more than twice through. Enough of all that. The charismatic service had been simply heaving with little kids, all joining in, dancing and singing and clapping. There weren't any in the other service, but the old people thought that wasn't fair. They liked looking at little children and wanted some in their service too, sitting still and quiet in the pews, of course, and sent out for the long prayers and the sermon. There was one church member, her name was Jean. She used to go to both services. She loved the choruses and the children. She loved worshipping in the Spirit. And she also loved the quietness of the more formal service, the traditional hymns and prayers. She always used to wear a hat, and she was one of the people who gave out the hymn books to worshippers filing in, with her smart navy blue linen suit and her red lipstick and wide, happy smile. Jean was lovely. She died. A sudden, unexpected, out-of-the-blue death in the leafy lane near her house as she was walking home. Everyone in the chapel mourned Jean's passing. At her funeral, her family asked to have all the elements of worship Jean had loved: hymns and traditional prayers, and the worship band leading us in singing choruses. And at Jean's funeral, because they loved her, and out of respect and consideration for her grieving family, the choir joined in singing everything. By the next Sunday, though, it all went back to normal. The worship band got up to lead us in singing well-known choruses, and the choir resumed their usual catatonic zombie apocalypse stance, didn't pick up the books to sing, sat with faces full of hate and disapproval, mouths shut tight, every one of them. And suddenly, it was as though something broke in me. I felt as if I was moving in a dream as I got up out of my pew, left my kids standing there singing, took my hymn book up the aisle past the worship band, up the steps to the choir stalls, held out the open book to the choir members and said, "Look, this is the song we're on. You know it. This is the number. You could sing for Jean. Can't you sing for Jesus?" That evening, our minister, who had never shown any pastoral interest in our family until then, was banging on our door, wanting to know how I could say such a mean and cruel thing. He said he'd had the son of the choir mistress on the phone in great distress, saying his mother, the choir mistress, had sat at home crying for 3 hours after I said that cruel and heartless thing to her. He demanded that I apologise, which I did. I understand the requirements of the Master regarding gentleness and humility, and I apologised properly to the offended party. Years after, I mean years, somehow it came up in conversation with one of the elderly choir members that the now long retired choir mistress really didn't like me. "Ah, yes, well," said my fellow Christian, "didn't you once say to her, 'Can't you sing for Jesus?'" There have been several of such last straw moments in my life. Times when something snapped, sorry, and I either had to say something or walk away. Moments that were game changers for me. You could sing for Jean. Can't you sing for Jesus? Moments when I just had enough. Some, like that time, resulted in nothing more than me voicing something that had been waiting to be said for a long time. Others have had larger consequences and resulted in my leaving a toxic relationship or refusing to cooperate with bullying or lying. Moments when, after years of struggling to stay in a difficult situation, something is done or said that crosses a line. Can be even a small thing. And I know I've had enough. As well as last straws, there are perfect storms that act as game changers, I came across a very succinct example of a perfect storm. I'm sorry we damaged your car. It was a perfect storm. Bad weather, poorly maintained brakes, and an inexperienced driver. Or, in the world of business and commerce, you can have structural factors, cyclical or recurring factors, and then temporary and possibly unexpected incidents combining to create the perfect storm that capsizes the company ship. Or for a young mother, in an ordinary domestic setting, you might get the perfect storm of a teething baby who cries constantly and will not sleep, the isolation of having moved to a new area for a husband's job, and the delivery man who rings the doorbell while the porridge is cooking, distracting the mother so that the porridge boils all over the stove and there is nothing else in the house for breakfast. Any of the events, taken singly and separately, would have been manageable. It's when they all arrive at the same time and place that the perfect storm overwhelms the crew. There's also the idea of the 100th monkey effect, the theory of morphogenesis, proposing that an idea has its time and catches on with everybody like a spark running through the stubble once enough individuals have taken it up. This is the concept of critical mass, the 100th monkey being the one that tips the scales and becomes the game changer. It's sometimes expressed as the 10,000th snowflake that triggers the avalanche. The death of George Floyd had something of this about it. Cruel, systemic, institutional racism of the most savage and sadistic nature has been built in to willfully blind white culture, not for decades, but for hundreds of years. But coming as it did, in a moment when the whole world was isolated and watching the news with unusually close attention, and without all the distractions of normal life, suddenly the dam burst and a great cry of sorrow and anguished outrage reverberated through the whole of humanity. It was a game changer. At least, I hope it will prove to have been so. The last straw, the perfect storm, the 100th monkey effect. These are the moments when something that of itself alone might pass unremarked, business as usual, becomes the kairos moment when abiding structures fall and change breaks in. And today I want to draw your attention to it being the little things we are talking about. A white policeman bullying a black man because in the culture that raised him this was the norm. An inexperienced driver settling behind the wheel of a car on a winter day. A delivery man ringing the bell as breakfast is cooking. Belligerent old ladies behaving as they always have. But when the circumstances are right, you have your game changer. But why we come to church is to worship God and pray for the world and find community and learn something useful to help our faith practice along. So what can we learn from this? I want to propose two things that can be of great advantage in the context of this strand of thought, and then an important third thing that activates and enables those two things. So, thing one. Life is mostly made up of little things. Fielding and managing them deftly and appropriately is what Buddhists sometimes describe as skillful means. It requires, another Buddhist term recently hijacked by Christians and the secular mainstream, mindfulness. When I was little, among the mantras my mother instilled into me were the phrases, pay attention and look what you're doing. That's mindfulness. There's a Zen story of a novice monk who went eagerly to the hut where his teacher dwelt for a precious hour of one-to-one teaching. It was raining, and he walked up the mountain path with dignity and recollection, just as he'd been taught. When he arrived, he shook the rain from his umbrella, furled it carefully, removed his sandals, knocked courteously, and went into the presence of his teacher, bowing low. The teacher greeted him and then asked, "When you came in, did you leave your umbrella to the right or to the left of your sandals?" The novice couldn't remember. "That's your lesson for today, then," said the teacher. It is as we pay heed to the little things as they occur and bring our full attention to the ordinary tasks and detail of our lives that we fit ourselves for creating security and peace, but with it flexibility. We notice small things others miss. We hear the singing in the rails as the train approaches. We see the dust cloud on the horizon as the enemy's cavalry approaches. We reach out to lift the pot from the stove when the doorbell rings. Not everything that shows up in your life is put there by you, but living mindfully, developing and practicing skillful means helps you to bring the best result out of unexpected circumstances. Life does also have a simply enormous spiritual dimension, of course. And when you live mindfully, aware and awake, you also learn to heed the quiet voice of the Spirit, and you end up being the person who is doing the right thing in the right place at the right time, instead of stumbling blindly from one chaotic catastrophe to the next. That's thing one, paying attention. Thing two is about seeing the flash of gold in the sand, seeing the path or the choice or the person the light shines on. And that's what happened with the woman in the story Grace read us. Sorry, I keep clearing my throat. I beg your pardon. That woman, it's not that she hadn't tried the mainstream, sophisticated, complicated treatments for her miserable gynecological condition. She'd tried everything. But when Jesus came to her village, she was paying attention. And you will notice she only presumed to reach out for something modest and small, kneeling or stooping among the jostling throng around the wandering healer. She just reached out to touch the hem of his garment, the dusty hem of his robe. Such a small thing, and such a passing moment, but for her a game changer, lifting her up from the unremitting exclusion over years of uncleanness and allowing her to take her place in society again. Not only was she made well, she was made whole, if you see what I mean. It was a choice, a fleeting action that brought all the painful shards of her life back into perfect alignment. And that's all she did. She showed up and she reached out to touch the hem of his robe. So thing one is to pay attention to the little things, because they are what determine outcomes. As we once used to say, look after the pennies and the pounds will look after themselves. And thing two is seize your moment when that moment comes, which is dependent, of course, on paying attention in the first place. And now here's the third thing. I feel I should maybe apologise, because this is what I always say, but friends, it is the key, the threshold, the way in. Choose simplicity. Simplify, simplify, simplify. The more crammed and cluttered is your life, the less you will notice, the more distracted and dazed you become, and the poorer quality are your choices. If you make sure you have hefty doses of silence and solitude, if you own few belongings, if your schedule is calm and quiet, if your finances are uncomplicated, if your relationships are few and well tended, you enhance the likelihood of your life flourishing regardless of what circumstances are unexpectedly pitched at you. You will be flexible, focused, and have enough space to think how to respond. That woman in our story from the Gospels, she was paying attention and she responded. Imagine if she'd been at a committee meeting or a bridge game or binge watching Downton Abbey when Jesus came by. That would have been a bummer, would it not? It's the little things that are the game changers, that make the perfect storm, the last straw, the snowflake that starts the avalanche. It is in the small choices and quiet encounters that healing comes, or great harm. Live simply, friends. Give yourself the space you need to pay attention. Notice which side of your sandals you left your umbrella. Take the pot off the stove when the doorbell rings. Reach out to touch the hem of his robe.